Hey, welcome to Lakeside Family Church Online. I'm Pastor Chris Petty, and we are doing a series based heavily on the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And the premise of that is that there are gaps in knowledge that we all have. None of us is 100% sure about really anything, 100% sure. And so we fill in those gaps based on the things that we do understand and the things that we do know with faith. And we've seen throughout this series that it really takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to believe that God created all this. And throughout this series, we have looked at what science has to say about the subject. We're not just quoting a bunch of Bible verses. We are seeing what science has to say. I mean, the science points to theism, or that there is a God. So here's the idea that we've seen that it takes so much faith to be an atheist. You would have to believe that without intelligent intervention, something arose from nothing. Another way to ask that question is, why is there something instead of nothing? If there was nothing, why is there now all of a sudden something? Well, if you're a theist, if you believe in God, you just believe that God caused it. If you're an atheist, you believe that nothing caused everything to happen. That takes a lot of faith. You would also have to believe that order arose out of chaos, which goes against some of the scientific laws that we already know. You'd have to believe that life arose from non-life. That's another tough pill to swallow, right? But you'd also have to believe that new life forms arose from existing life forms, despite the fact that the evidence speaks to the contrary. For example, genetic limits, cyclical changes, you have to ignore that, irreducible complexity, molecular isolation, and the non-viability of transitional forms. Now, that's a lot of big words and a lot of big terms. When I stated that we are relying heavily on the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, this is a little out of my wheelhouse. I'm a preacher, and I know the Bible stuff. I do the Bible stuff. I'm not so hot at the science stuff. So I've been learning a lot during this too. And so I want to give that book and those authors due credit. Because I mean, I'm using some of what I've collected over the years, but this is not my typical message. And we're going to kind of bring this really to a head here before we're all done. So somebody might then ask, what about the fossil record? You know, we've all seen the pictures of the evolutionary forms and the transitions, and just a few words on that, and we'll kind of wrap this thing up and put a bow on it for you. Without today's technology, Darwin did not and could not have recognized the problems that his theory would have. We understand so much more now that Darwin could have understood. I mean, you could almost say, well, it's understandable how he could make some of these mistakes based on the information that he had and the technology that was available to him. But now it seems as though science has in every way proven him wrong. And we know so much more about life, the origins of life. Not only can we see farther into space, but we can look deeper into a living cell. And so we have so much more information and knowledge. And none of that additional information and knowledge is helping Darwin and his theory very much. Darwin actually wrote, "Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be used against my theory." So Darwin was saying, look, if we don't see some form halfway between the chimp and the man, halfway between a bacteria and a three-toed sloth, if we don't see some of these transitional forms, then that's going to be a real problem for my theory. Now, it's been a great many years since Darwin formed his evolutionary theory. And you know what? Time and archaeology has not proven his theory to be accurate. In fact, we still have not found any in-between forms. You said, well, wait a minute. Well, when I was in high school or maybe when I was in college, I saw this picture in a textbook. Did you? Or did you see an artist's conception of something? Did you see a picture, a drawing, a painting? Did you see a photograph? A lot of the things that we see are artists' versions and renditions of what demonstrates Darwin's theory. But you don't see a whole lot of actual photographs. And friends, I will tell you that most, if not all of the ones that you have seen have been disproven. More on that in just a little bit. So Darwin couldn't recognize the problems that his theory was going to have. But we have the ability, and because of scientific advancements and our ability to explore in ways that he didn't have, we have been able to demonstrate and show, dare I say prove, that his theory is incorrect. We should have found, if his theory is correct, we should have found thousands, if not millions, of transitional forms. And yet, when a fossil is unearthed, what you find is some animal that, if it's not extinct, it looks just like other animals that we have today. You don't see anything in between a fish and a lizard. Now look, there's going to be lots of excuses and lots of stories and lots of explanations as for why and well, what about this certain unique circumstance? We'll touch on that more in just a moment. But we have set this up in previous messages on how if you've already started with the assumption that there is no God, then no amount of proof will ever demonstrate, or no amount of evidence will ever cause you to believe that there is a God. Your mind is already made up. And we see that much of this evolutionary science, that's exactly what's happening. The assumption is already there that there is no God. And so now they have to kind of figure out how to mold reality to fit their conclusions. Not the best science. Remember, we've also said that this is not an issue of science versus the Bible. More on that in a minute as well. This is really an issue of good science versus bad science. All right, so we should have seen, you should be able to go somewhere and look at, in some museum somewhere, or at least online, you should be able to see some form that's in between what we know to be the case today. And they simply do not exist. Darwin even recognized, boy, if you could find these forms, that sure would help, and we haven't found them yet. Evolutionist Stephen Gould recognized this. He championed the theory known as punctuated equilibrium. That's another fun phrase. Pull that out at your next party. It'll be a big hit. Punctuated equilibrium. All right, so that idea is, so Stephen Gould recognized that, hey, you know what? It's been a century. We haven't found any of these transitional forms. Every lizard we found looks like a lizard. Every fish we found looks like a fish. We haven't found a fish with legs yet. We haven't found anything in between. And so he came up with this idea. And the fossil record demonstrates that the belief that most theists have, that, hey, just God put this all here in the forms that they presently exist in, the fossil record really supports a theistic view of that. And so what was Gould's way around that? How did he attempt to answer that? So he came up with this idea of punctuated equilibrium. In other words, the fish doesn't slowly grow legs over time and lungs and lose its gills and fins slowly by chance over long periods of time. If you need more evidence to support that, we've done plenty of messages in this series that you can go back and explore that. If you've been tuned in with us for every one of these, then you recognize what I'm saying. We don't see any of those transitional forms. So Gould's idea then was to have punctuated equilibrium. In other words, the fish just all of a sudden changes into a lizard. It doesn't take time. It doesn't evolve slowly by chance, some by unguided forces. He teaches that the forms just immediately change. Well, that would explain, I suppose, why you don't see any transitional forms in the fossil record, right? I mean, wow, what an amazing theory that it just changes instantly, like in a generation. So the fish gives birth to a lizard. That's why I think I shared with you before. I asked my friend one time that was teaching me, trying to share with me the reality and the truths of punctuated equilibrium. His wife was pregnant with a baby, and I asked him, what do you suppose the chances are that your baby is going to be a regular human baby? I thought it was kind of funny and sort of clever, a little bit snotty when I asked him that. But you and I both agree, whether you're a believer, whether you're not, we all agree that the chances of that baby coming out, a human baby, is 100%. No one expects that human mama is going to give birth to something different, baby with wings or something, right? Or some completely different creature. No one thinks that that's going to happen. Well, that's exactly what Gould is saying. This is a prominent evolutionary theory right now. And the reason it's prominent is because we do not find transitional forms in between what we already know to be, the regular animals that we have. That's why it's a popular theory today, because it explains something. Now, you might say, what's the evidence for Gould's theory of punctuated equilibrium? Well, there is none. The evidence is actually, if I would call it evidence, it's actually the absence of evidence. It's actually the fact that they don't have the transitional forms that are so needed to support this theory, the theory of evolution. And so they created this theory of punctuated equilibrium to get around it. Well, they must have changed instantly, and that's why we don't see some in-between type forms. All right? The only reason he believes this is because there are no supporting fossil records, and he must come up with something. Nearly all, and this is really interesting, nearly all major groups of animals show up suddenly, all at one time. In fact, this has been described as the biological Big Bang. So as you're looking through the stratas, the layers of Earth, there is one layer where suddenly all these animals appear out of nowhere. We don't have the evolutionary idea that the little globule, the little bacteria changes to something a little bigger, a little higher form of life, and then that changes into something else. We don't see that. You've seen the tree. We'll try to pull up an illustration for you here. You've seen the tree that shows the little glob. I picked this illustration to show you because it just shows the little globule of something. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but just a little blob of somebody sneezed. Probably has coronavirus in it, Somebody sneezed and there's that little globule of something. I guess that thing is living. And then we see the tree branch, the tree coming up in the different branches as though this little blob evolved into all these different things. And the reality of it is that the fossil record is actually not a tree where one thing evolved into another thing, evolved into another thing, evolved into another thing. Someone has called it more akin to a front lawn, that it's all these blades of grass. In other words, there's a layer, and then all of a sudden, all these life forms shoot up out of this layer. And instead of them all branching off from a tree, branching off, that would be the right word. That it's more like all of a sudden there's this layer and life forms just appear everywhere. That's the grass illustration. I don't know if you're getting that. I didn't probably explain that very well. But that's the idea. They all show up at once and suddenly. Now, does that sound more akin to evolutionary theory? Or does that sound more like what the Christian is saying? Like, you know what? I think God just created this at a point in time. That seems to support scientifically the Christian perspective that there is a God and he in fact made those animals and he was their origin. So the authors of the book, they raise I think an interesting point here. They say, well, what about those pictures that we see? And I'll add something to this. What about those pictures that we see? You always see those skulls, lined up. There's a few skulls sitting out, and it shows, kind of how human beings evolved from some common ancestor that was a primate of some kind. Well, our authors make a point that 99% of any creature's biological makeup is in the soft material. In other words, the stuff that's gone, the stuff that we can't test, the stuff that we can't check. Not from the hard, like fossil itself. They're saying, well, maybe 1%. But most of the biological makeup and any information that you can get about one creature being related to another, you get from the soft material, which is long gone. All right, so when you see these pictures of these skulls that you may have seen in high school or in college, that doesn't necessarily establish, in fact, it doesn't establish a relationship. Henry Gee, chief science writer for Nature, writes, "To take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps even instructive, but not very scientific." So these skulls that you've seen, right? So there's one called, well, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these are just an artist's depiction. Somebody described to the artist, or perhaps the Darwinist drew the picture himself. Here's what I think this probably looked like. And that's what you see in some evolutionary textbooks, right? Just somebody just kind of made it up. Some of the skulls that we've seen over time have simply been a mistake. You might be familiar with Lucy. So Lucy was supposed to be a transitional form, and it turns out that Lucy was just an ape. I believe it was an extinct ape, so a little bit different kind of an ape that we have around today, but an ape nonetheless, not an ape man or anything in between. So Lucy is really disproven. That may be harsh. It was a mistake. Lucy is an ape. All right. Then there were so some of these things are artist depictions. Some of these things are mistakes, maybe honest mistakes, maybe not, I don't know. And some of them were intentional frauds. Piltdown Man is one that was supposed to be a transitional form. This idea was completely built around the tooth of a pig. And then they sort of extrapolated their ideas from there and created what this Piltdown Man must have looked like. And it was all based on a pig's tooth. So once again, and that was really demonstrated to be an actual fraud, all right? Somebody pushing an agenda created this transitional form between ape and man that really didn't even exist. So when I say you don't have any transitional forms, I meant exactly that. There are no transitional forms. Now, I thought this was interesting too. Think about your old friends, the Neanderthals, right? So Neanderthals were they're not transitional forms either. They're just humans. They were just a breed. They're just a race breed. They were just a race of people. And actually they've discovered today that many people living today share DNA with Neanderthals. You can insert your own joke there about your knuckle-dragging husbands, ladies. Actually, Neanderthals weren't knuckle-dragging, though. I shouldn't say knuckle-dragging. That's not very funny, because it gives you an image of Neanderthals, which they were not. Now, I went online, I looked at, I Googled some, Neanderthals. And so there have been some reconstructions based on some of the skulls and the bones that we have. I'd like to give you some samples of that. So we'll look at some of these. So you've seen this forensic science. They take the skull and they add the muscle layers, they add the skin, and they sort of build upon the skull of what they have, and they try to get a realistic idea of what this individual looked like. And so you can certainly find some unflattering Neanderthal pictures, but a lot of these reconstructions are not horrible. They just look like people. They don't look like anybody from the Geico commercials. They're just people. They might have one prominent physical attribute in one way or another, or lacking a prominent attribute in one way or another. But they're just people. People are. We talked about microevolution, not a dirty word. Microevolution. You look at different groups and different races of people, and they have some different physical attributes. That doesn't mean that they are something different or other than a human being. They just have certain different traits. And so you look at these Neanderthals, they're not entirely unattractive. I mean, look at Grandpa here. He looks like a swell guy. Like I would like to hang out with this guy. You know, have a glass of iced tea and sit out on the porch and talk about the good old days. I mean, the good old days, right? But this reconstruction, does that look like something between an ape and a man, or does it just look like a man with certain physical features? Not maybe, you know, he might not look like a relative of mine, but he's a man. He certainly would be a relative of mine, right? Because we all trace our ancestry back to Adam in that regard. So, and then we have Neanderthal lady. I mean, look at Neanderthal lady. It's not horrible. I've dated women uglier than that, right? So Neanderthal lady, you know, not horribly unattractive. The reason why is because she's not some form in between human and ape. She's a woman. She's a human being, right? So Lucy, a mistake. Piltdown man, a fraud. Neanderthals, not a transitional form. Just humans, all right? So the atheist has the daunting task of taking everything that is alive and causing it and having to substantiate that they're all related. So the palm tree and the peacock and the octopus and the locust and the bat and the duck-billed platypus and the hippopotamus and the porcupine and the seahorse and the Venus flytrap, the human being, and mold are all related. Now, friends, we've said this already. If you're committed to atheism, you might be watching this right now and say, you know what, this guy, that's ridiculous. He's so dumb. He doesn't understand anything. If you're really committed to atheism, but you know what? It takes a whole lot of faith to believe that the peacock and the porcupine and the three-toed sloth and the palm tree and the goo and the bacteria and mold and everything else come from a common ancestor. That takes a lot of faith. And the pretzel logic and the twisted thinking and the cart before the horse science that has to take place in order to arrive at that conclusion. I said it before, this isn't the Bible against science. This is good science against bad science. Now, we could talk about, and I won't. This is more what I'm used to. I'm better at this. Like, this is in my wheelhouse. But there's also an argument called the moral law. I don't want to get into that. That's actually, I don't know why. It's the easiest thing probably for me to discuss. But I probably discuss that kind of thing. And in this series, I'm really stretching and kind of going beyond and outside my comfort zone. But the moral law simply stated, says that there are things that we understand to be true. I've shared before in church my conversation with a man who said there is no such thing as right and there's no such thing as wrong. There's no God. So if there's no God, there's no such thing as right. There's no such thing as wrong. We have our societal views that we like. We have, you know, the laws that man makes, but inherently, if there's no God, there's no lawgiver. And so really, laws that men create are really just sort of arbitrary. And so this gentleman went on to say that there's no such thing as good or evil. And so I pressed him on that point, and I said, well, that means that murder, the taking of an innocent life, not self-defense, not defending yourself, that would be the taking of a life that is not innocent. But murder is the taking of an innocent life, right? So that's not wrong. And in order to be consistent, he had to say, yeah, that's right, that's not wrong. I said, what about raping a woman? How do you feel about that? Is raping a woman wrong? And in order to be logically consistent, he had to say, raping a woman isn't wrong. Now, it might get you thrown in jail, but there's nothing inherently wrong about that. I mean, he was being logically consistent, But he knew, I could see it in his face, he knew that I had him. And what's even more alarming is this fella had spent his entire career in law enforcement. I mean, whether it's human laws or something outside and beyond human laws, I'm hoping that those in law enforcement understand that there is something inherently wrong with taking the life of the innocent and raping women. So there is an argument about that we could discuss called the moral law. That's a different subject for a different time. I don't want to get into that. You can maybe look that up, or maybe if you're that interested, maybe put something in the comments and maybe we can pursue that at some point. So this is what we've learned in this series. This is very important. This is why we did this series. Here's what we've learned in this series: that truth does in fact exist and is knowable. Truth exists, and we can know that it's true. Think about this. Any denial of truth presupposes truth. Think about that. Any denial of truth presupposes truth. But what do you mean by that? When I say truth, truth exists and can be knowable. If your response to that is, well, I don't believe that there is any such thing as true, my question to you would be, well, is that statement true? Because if that statement is true, it's self-defeating. And you have already assumed that things are true when you make your case that there's no such thing as truth. Okay, that's a little hard to wrap your head around. I know for some of us. You can rewind, watch it over and over again. And you notice I still had to look at my notes for that one, right? But we've also learned beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? Beyond a reasonable doubt, that whatever, and this is really the important thing here. This is why I did this whole series. We've seen that whatever is responsible for creation must be self-existent, not dependent on anything. Must be timeless, right? We showed this scientifically. Whatever created the universe must be non-spatial and must be immaterial, since whatever it was that created everything that is outside of or created space, time, and matter. Whatever created space, time, and matter must be outside or above space, time, and matter. In other words, he is without limits. That is, he is infinite. Sounds a lot like God, doesn't it? And we showed this scientifically. Number two, whatever created everything that exists must be unimaginably powerful, since he created the entire universe out of nothing. Now, I know it seems crazy. Oh, you crazy theist, the big invisible man in the sky created everything out of nothing. Well, we can laugh at that, and we can mock those that believe that, but the big man in the sky that created everything out of nothing is not as difficult to believe as nothing created everything that exists out of nothing. I mean, if you're on the fence, which one of those things really takes more faith to believe? All right, number three, whatever created all that is must be personal, since he chose to convert a state of nothingness into the space, time, material universe that we have. An impersonal force has no ability to make choices, to make decisions, all right? Number four, whatever created all that is must be supremely intelligent, since he designed life and the universe with such incredible complexity and precision. And number five, whatever created the universe must be extremely purposeful, since he designed the many forms of life to live in this specific and ordered environment. Now, that being that created all that is, that we've demonstrated scientifically, sounds a lot like and is consistent with the God of the Bible. Now, I want to be very clear here. This has been a very strange series for me that we've done. It's been difficult because this does not come easily to me. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for 26 years. And it was very difficult doing this because if you go back and look, I didn't say this at the beginning because I was afraid of you. I was afraid of you. I didn't say this at the beginning. But I didn't really use a lot of scripture in this series. Since day one that I've been having church for 26 years, for almost 3 decades, I'm basing what I say on the Bible. And I try to just, talk so fast and use such big words that the regular church goers wouldn't get it. Like, hey, you know what? He didn't really use the Bible. But that's exactly the point. I did not use the Bible to prove the Bible. For this particular series, I think that strengthens what we're saying. I didn't quote a scripture that says, the Bible says that there is a God, right? That would be something of a circular argument, right? If the Bible says there's God and therefore there must be a God. We really didn't do that. I didn't want anybody to get upset with me. Hey, did you notice he didn't really use any Bible verses this week? I threw some in, I sprinkled some in over the course of this series. But that was intentional. We didn't use the Bible to prove the Bible. We used science to give evidence of the existence of God. We didn't just quote a bunch of scripture at you. That's why I said this isn't an issue of the Bible versus science. We haven't really talked about the Bible that much. We've talked about science. This is an issue of good science versus bad science. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Verse 19, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. The Bible does confirm the things that we've been saying, that the heavenlies, the skies, the universe, and nature itself declares that there is a God. It takes men to take that reality and twist it into something that goes against what is common sense. So in this series, I just read you the list of things that we've demonstrated. Now let me break this down for you in an even more relevant way. If we've done our job, and I think we have, in demonstrating, not by quoting much Bible verses, but scientifically, that there is strong evidence to believe in a God. And we know a lot about his personality. Friends, I want you to understand this. This is so powerful. That based on what we've discovered, Hinduism cannot be true because it's pantheistic, an impersonal God, or polytheistic, many smaller, lesser gods, right? Based on what we've learned, Hinduism cannot be true. Based on what we've learned, scientifically, Buddhism cannot be true. Buddhism is pantheistic or atheistic. Based on what we've seen scientifically, the New Age movement and everything akin to that cannot be true because it's pantheistic. Atheism cannot be true. The evidence, if you weigh the evidence, we said at the very beginning, I can't prove that there's a God any more than the atheist can prove that there isn't a God. But what we can do is compare the evidence. And the evidence is much, much stronger for my side. I'd go to court with my evidence any day. We've shown scientifically that the evidence supports that there is, in fact, a God. So atheism cannot be true. Mormonism cannot be true. It's polytheistic. They believe in numerous gods. we've shown that that couldn't be the case. Witchcraft or paganism cannot be true. It's pantheistic or polytheistic. Taoism can't be true. It's pantheistic or atheistic. Confucianism really started as a philosophy but evolved into a religion, is atheistic, can't be true. Shintoism is polytheistic. We've demonstrated scientifically that that cannot be true. Friends, that leaves us with the reality and the understanding that science and everything that we know, if we're honest with ourselves, that we've eliminated all these other major world religions, and there's others that we could list. These are the major ones. That there has to be one God. You know, of the world's great religions, there's only 3 major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We've really shown scientifically that those are really the only candidates for what is the true nature of the universe and who made it. That leaves only three religions are left standing. Just as certain players are cut from the team because they do not have the necessary abilities, all these other religions, philosophies, and beliefs have to be cut from the roster because they don't measure up. They're all disproven by science. One of the 3 major world religions must be the truth. Now we're not going to get into that, but I wanted to at least get you to the point where, you know what, there's truth that's knowable. There's a God who created all this. It didn't happen by accident. That God is personal. He's unimaginably powerful. And, you know, this would be a great place to insert the fact that according to Christian teaching, one of the 3 last contenders standing, that God knows every hair on your head and loves you and cares about you. What an awesome, awesome reality that is. Well, we don't have time to get into this in any greater detail. I thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've learned a lot. I know I've learned a lot. And we will be in touch. And thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you. We will see you soon.